I need to set the scene for you because I really want you to feel this. Picture an old log cabin, the kind you see on postcards or the covers of winter-themed magazines. It's nestled at the end of a winding road deep in the Appalachian Mountains, surrounded by trees so dense they blot out the sun even on the brightest days. This place belonged to my friend Courtney, and we were supposed to have the ultimate winter getaway. Just two friends decompressing after the chaos of the holidays. The drive up had been uneventful at first. The forecast warned of snow, but it wasn't supposed to hit until late that evening. We arrived just as the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows that made the trees look like gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. I remember Courtney remarking how still everything felt, like the world was holding its breath or something. I chalked it up to the usual eerie quiet of remote places. The cabin was beautiful, but not in a polished way. It had more of a lived-in charm. A stone fireplace, mismatched furniture, and a faint smell of cedar and mothballs. Courtney had warned me that the cabin was old, and it was prone to drafts and creaks. What she didn't mention was how isolated it was. There wasn't another cabin or house in sight. The nearest neighbor was apparently an older man named Ed, who lived about half a mile away. Courtney said he was the caretaker of sorts, though she'd only met him a couple of times. By the time we unpacked and got a fire going, the snow had started falling, fat flakes that looked almost magical against the darkening sky. Courtney laughed and said we were in for a cozy night. We cooked dinner, drank wine, and settled into the kind of easy meandering conversations that you can only have with someone you've known for years. But then the wind picked up. It wasn't the gentle whistling you might expect, but a low, mournful howl that made the windows rattle. I tried to ignore it, but the sound had a way of making me feel really uneasy, like a constant reminder of how far away from everything we were or something. Around midnight, Court decided to head to bed, leaving me alone in the living room. I was half watching the fire, half scrolling through photos on my phone when I noticed something odd. As I looked out the window, the snow was falling way harder now, plastering to the windows in uneven patches. Through a clear spot, I thought I saw movement. Just a flicker, but it was like somebody walking past the window. I told myself it was probably just the wind stirring the trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it looked too deliberate, too human. The storm got worse overnight, and by morning the cabin was completely snowed in. The front door wouldn't budge, and the windows were nearly buried. Court joked that we'd have to start rationing food, but her nervous laugh gave her away. Neither of us were thrilled at the idea of being trapped, but we figured it would pass. Snowplows would clear the main roads eventually, and we'd dig ourselves out when the storm eased up a bit. Except it didn't ease up. By mid-afternoon, the snow was coming down harder than ever. We tried to distract ourselves with board games and books, but the oppressive quiet made it hard to focus. It was the kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like the world had been muted. And then we noticed the tracks. Late in the afternoon, Courtney spotted them, faint impressions in the snow just beyond the edge of the porch. They looked like footprints, but they didn't make any sense. For one, they were staggered, as if whoever made them was limping or dragging something. And they were too big, easily twice the size of the average person's foot. Court tried to brush it off, saying maybe Ed had come by to check on us. But even she didn't sound convinced. Why would anyone be out in a storm like this? That night, the strange noises started. At first, it was just a faint scratching sound, like tree branches scraping against the cabin, or maybe a rodent trying to take shelter. But as the hours dragged on, it became more distinct, shuffling, thudding, the occasional creak of the porch steps. Courtney and I both tried to pretend we weren't hearing it, but by midnight, it was impossible to ignore. We barricaded the front door with furniture, more for our own peace of mind than anything else. I remember whispering to Court that maybe it was just an animal, a bear or a raccoon or a stray cat looking for shelter. But deep down, I knew that didn't explain the deliberate sound of footsteps circling the cabin. The power went out shortly after, plunging the cabin into complete darkness. The fire had died down to embers, and the temperature dropped fast. We huddled under blankets, listening to the storm and the increasingly unnerving sounds outside. At one point, I thought I heard a low, guttural growl, but Courtney insisted it was just the wind. The turning point came in the early hours of the morning. I was dozing off when a loud, metallic banging jolted me awake. It sounded like something or someone was hitting the side of the cabin with a metal object. Courtney grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and whispered that we needed to stay quiet. The banging continued, sporadic and erratic, for what felt like hours. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, like whatever was out there was just waiting for us to let our guard down. When the first light of dawn filtered through the snow-covered windows, we finally dared to move. The storm had eased up slightly, and we decided to make a run for Ed's cabin. The snow was waist-deep, and every step was a struggle, but the thought of staying in that cabin another night was unbearable. As we trudged through the snow, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every so often, I'd glance over my shoulder, convinced I'd see something. A shadow, a figure, anything. But there was nothing, just endless white. We reached Ed's cabin just as the sun was starting to rise. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the place was empty. There was no sign of Ed, just a half-eaten meal on the table and a wood stove that had gone cold. Courtney found a note on the counter, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Stay inside. It comes at night." We didn't wait to find out what it was. We grabbed what supplies we could and headed back to Court's cabin, praying the roads would be clear soon. When we got back, we found the barricade we'd made at the front door completely destroyed. The furniture inside was overturned, and deep gouges marred the wooden floorboards. Whatever had been out there hadn't just been watching. It had tried to get in. The storm finally broke that afternoon, and we managed to flag down a plow truck on the main road. We didn't even tell the driver what happened. Who would believe us anyway? But as we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the cabin. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing in the trees, tall, shadowy, and impossibly still. But when I blinked, it was gone. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Courtney refuses to talk about it, and I've stopped trying to make sense of it. All I know is that whatever it was out there wasn't human, and it wasn't just the storm that left us snowbound and scared out of our minds.